Hi again then guys, and welcome to yet another car review from the first Project Gotham title. We don't feature a huge amount of cars from this game because there aren't a huge amount of cars in the game that were not carried over, which is cool. That's actually a very good sign. The fewer cars you have to review in an older game, generally speaking, means that a lot of those cars were kept. And that's definitely the case here. Now this is probably the most unique car that I'm going to review from this first game. It's the Ford Focus Cosworth. Interesting choice of car to have in the game, and there are some vehicles, I would say in pretty much each of the Project Gotham games, that kind of surprise you. You wouldn't expect them to be there, necessarily. Something like the Y2K Turbine Superbike in Project Gotham 4, or the SUVs in Project Gotham 2, or even something like the Elfin Clubman in Project Gotham 3. These vehicles which are really niched and kind of oddball, almost like their own version of a little unsung hero in the game. Now this is definitely one of those because I'm not even sure if this car technically exists. I'm sure it's a riff on some existing vehicle, but I've never specifically seen this car that I can recall. And it's interesting because at this time in various games, you would see a lot of very unique Ford Focus variants, if you actually think about it. If you look back at Forza, for instance, Forza did not have the Focus ST170 that we had here in the UK. Gran Turismo had that, but Forza had the Ford SVT Focus, which is a very different car. Then you had this game, which has the Focus that's not an RS, but kind of is an RS. They just call it the Focus Cosworth, and in terms of the spec that they give this car, well, they give it a lot of respect, because the handling is an 8. That's really high. In fact, of all the cars that I'm going to review, that's the second highest. Second only, in fact, behind the Porsche 911 GT2. That's pretty hefty for a Ford Focus. Now, the other specs are good. Not like the best in the game or anything, of course, but they are very good. It's got a 7 for acceleration and a 6 for top speed, which, again, to put that into perspective, means that the acceleration rating is the same as the Panoz Esperante, and the top speed is actually higher than, for instance, the BMW Z3 or the Mercedes SLK. That's not a bad comparison for a Ford Focus to have. Plus, on top of all of that, as far as I can recall, it might well be the only car in the game that actually has a livery, which you can choose for it, and you can see me using that livery in the video with decals and the Ford logo and all that kind of thing, which, again, is kind of weird. You don't see many race cars in Project Gotham, or at least until the 4th game, where there were many more of those like the Aston DBR9 and the Radical SR9 and that kind of stuff. But the real question is, of course, what can this one do? Is it a good car? Or is it outclassed by the actual exotics that are in the game? Well, to some degree, unfortunately, I would say it kind of falls into the latter, because I've driven a few cars in this game now. I've drove, of course, the Porsche GT2, the Panoz, I've driven the Ferrari F355 Spider. In fact, I've driven all of the vehicles that I'm going to be reviewing in this series, including the aforementioned BMW Z3 and the Mercedes SLK. And I would have to say that even compared to something like that Mercedes, the little SLK Roadster, the Ford does not handle as well as that does. That may well be the best handling car I've driven in the game, in fact. This car doesn't have bad handling, per se, but it's very cumbersome. You can feel the weight of the car, and it does have a lot of grip, but sometimes having that much grip, especially in a front-wheel drive or even all-wheel drive chassis, it can be cumbersome, and you can feel that in this car, because it's the kind of car where I feel that it feels like it's in the wrong game, in a funny kind of way, because as cool as it is to have it in here, it makes about as much sense as having a school bus. I mean, literally, this is a car that isn't designed for street racing. It's clearly a rally-inspired vehicle, and there are no rally tracks in Project Gotham last time I checked. So if you were to put this car as a special vehicle in, say, WRC or Colin McRae at the time, or even something like Gran Turismo or Forza, then that would make sense. It's that kind of car. You've got rally tracks, you could use it as this weird little kind of unicorn car that slips between the regulations of road and race. But in Project Gotham, it just doesn't make a huge amount of sense. Rally cars don't really have any place in this game, and unless it's a rally car that was, you know, overwhelmingly good on the tarmac, like a Stratos or something like that, or the Ferrari 308 GTM, then chances are it's not going to be that great. So overall, I would say that this is certainly not a bad car. In fact, if you do go back to play the first game, it's one of the vehicles I would recommend you go and check out, because it does have a very unique, interesting alternative perspective on a high-performance car in Project Gotham. There aren't a huge amount of hot hatches in the later games as well, so if you're into that, if you're into Ford RSs and Ford Cosworths, it's certainly a unicorn that you'll want to check out, and one of the most unique cars in the game for sure. It's just a car that, as unique and as interesting and as oddball and as badass as it is in its own little way, it feels definitely out of place in this game. It doesn't have many, if any, natural rivals in the game, and for all of its uniqueness, it doesn't really feel fast enough to necessarily beat a lot of these other established sports cars and supercars. And somewhat ironically, what you would probably assume would be a great cornering machine with maybe something of a lack of straight-line performance actually turns out to be the opposite. This is better on the straights than it is through corners, which is kind of weird. So overall, definitely a unique car. I would certainly recommend trying it out if you go back to play the first game, because it feels like nothing else. But overall, that's it for this review. Of course, I'll see you guys next time with more, and there's not that many left in the first Project Gotham game. There's only around 6 or 7 cars that are unique to that game anyway. But overall, that's it for this review. I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.